Hello there, how are you going? My name is Dr. Catherine Ball. I am so delighted to be doing this session right here from my wonderful place in Gubby Land, just north of Brisbane Airport here in Queensland. I can't wait for 2022 and 2023 when we can finally physically start getting back together again. But for the moment, here we are with the beautiful, beautiful technology that we have surrounding us in our life. And I say that beautiful technology, it's a beauty and a beast. And one of the things I want to talk to you today is about the future. But I want to frame it using some real-world examples, some high-level theory, and some tools that futurists and cyberneticists might use to describe, predict, or evaluate the performance of any kind of new system that you implement, remove, revive, find. Okay, so we'll start with this concept of fintech as a cybernetic system. And I'm going to be talking a bit about cybernetics and about different types of things that are happening in the money world. And it's an interesting thing to say that there are some areas that are still really ripe for growth, that even during the pandemic times, we've seen really patchy uptake of certain technologies. It's not been very equal around the world and also inside different sectors. So I think the fintech world and the finance world and the money world still has a lot of areas that are ripe for disruption. And it seems to me, when I look through some of the examples we're going to be walking through today, that some things might be a complete no-brainer. Sometimes also we're early adopters. Sometimes we have to work out why we're getting out of bed in the morning. And sometimes we have to work out how to future-proof how those systems are going to operate in an increasingly volatile world, facing the climate emergency and looking at the geopolitical aspects of what the climate emergency is going to bring to planet Earth, to us as humans. Okay, so let's go swiftly on. The idea of having human beings that are in digital form is almost like what Mark Zuckerberg is trying to do with Meta or the Metaverse. And this idea that we can create digital copies of ourselves, our behaviors, to actually then target people with different kinds of advertising, to work out where they're actually needing assistance, where actually they need a different kind of payment system, where their businesses might be improved or changed if they actually involved new technology on the grassroots as well as the high echelons and the back door of how they're operating their businesses. And what do we as human beings become when we get transformed into something that is no longer flesh and bone? And so the metaverse might seem that it wants to be a virtual version of planet Earth and the world in which we inhabit. But one thing we know about the internet is that it's not the real world. And so we've got some serious conversations to be had around something maybe even as simple as payroll, for example. You know, how we get paid, how we access our salary, how we access that money, how immediately do people get paid for the work that they do. And we've seen patchy disruption in sort of the startup and entrepreneurship world where people have got things like little payment portals where people can swipe their phone or swipe their credit card on a portable device that never existed 5 years ago. I remember with my small businesses looking at getting an FPOS machine, a banking machine, and it was really expensive to hire a banking machine. And then came the little square things that we found in the US, but they weren't in Australia and they weren't in the UK. And so it was a matter of how do we as businesses keep up with the technology when our use cases aren't well understood or being answered by some of the Silicon Valley technology that's coming out. And so the idea of having something built fit for purpose for us as individuals, I think, is a bit of the holy grail. Because if we can work out exactly how a person is going to need financial support, financial services, access to credit, access to money, access to their salary, and we put that all in one place, we call that convergence. We call that convergent technologies. So to be immediate and accurate, there are two things that can sometimes be a little bit, you choose one or the other. Oil and water. You either have something that's immediate or you have something that's accurate. And so how do we put that together in a predictive framework? And the answer here is artificial intelligence. The answer here is deep machine learning and also actually understanding the problem. Because if there's one thing humans are very good at, and David Attenborough mentioned this at COP26, we're very good at solving problems. And I think half the battle with new technologies, and you've probably come up against this yourself, if you've ever used a piece of software, you wonder, why on earth did that person put that function in there? I think for me, it was the day I understood what dollar signs in Excel spreadsheets meant, yet I'd never known that before. And when someone told me what the dollar sign did in an Excel spreadsheet, it was like my world changed. It was like you could hear the choir from the heavens, beaming light down onto me of realization of what this particular function inside this spreadsheet could actually do. It changed how I analyzed data on a particular project that saved me literally probably weeks of my life. But this is the difficulty, right? So we have patchiness, not only of existing and new and emerging technologies, but we also have patchiness of education or capability or understanding of individuals in order to take advantage of that. We're not seeing this changing anytime soon. And in the pandemic, like I mentioned, some things that were even orphan technologies like the QR codes, I was about to call them GPRS codes, the QR codes that we have where we click in and sign into a restaurant or whatever, that was obsolete technology 5 years ago. It had no real use case. We weren't sure why it was still around. It wasn't really very, at the forefront of Silicon Valley's mind. But now QR codes have become incredibly important and they've become part of our daily lives. And in fact, for a lot of us, they've actually probably become quite routine and therefore they've become invisible. And it's when technologies become invisible that they actually have succeeded in becoming part of our everyday life. And so this idea of the permanent present is something that holds back some of those tailored, bespoke, cutting-edge, new and emerging technology-based solutions. And as a futurist, there's a couple of things that we have to think about and ways in which we have to challenge, a bit Yoda-like, unlearning what we've had learned. And the permanent present, or what I've put here is permanent present payments. So like how you do payments now. If I said to you, that is not how you're going to be doing payments in 5 years' time. So let's just think about this like a babushka, a Russian doll. When we think about a futurist concept around something like the payments world, and you go, okay, what is possible? Let's just completely whiteboard this. There's no stupid answer. What is possible? Facial recognition-based immediate payments when you walk through a Wi-Fi gate or something. You will no longer have to swipe a card to access something. It literally just picks up your face and bills you. When you complete a day's work, your timesheets are filled out literally by monitoring your computer activity and your face and working out who's doing what on a particular job. And then you get paid for it that day. You don't have to wait for 2 weeks or for 4 weeks or for a month to get paid. And for small businesses, for example, the idea that some small businesses, when you sign contracts with large corporates, you have to wait 6 months to get paid. But this isn't right because all of the things that are possible about payment systems means that everything could be kind of immediate and accurate if we really had the systems in place and the data and understanding. Okay, so that's your big babushka, that's your big Russian doll. What is possible? Then the next stage is really actually what's probable. And what's probable is all these ideas of, where the regulators are going to kick in, where the software is going to kick in, where the communications and comms checks, where cybersecurity is going to kick in, where's validation kicking in, and all of the checks and balances that we have inside a pipeline of a payment system immediately. What happens if, like when they first had with the iPhones that used your face to open up your phone, sometimes people's children looked so similar to their parents, and I believe it was a teenage lad and his mum, that he could unlock her phone, that the phone thought that he was her. And so, okay, that was a cute little accident that he could access mummy's phone. But can you imagine if he could access mummy's bank account? I don't know that she would be just quite as amused as she was about the phone. But yeah, so that's your probable then. And then you apply actually, what do you want in life? What do we want to be doing? What do we want to be having in place? Do we want immediate payments? Is there going to be a way in which we can stop fraud? Is there going to be a way in which we can stop money laundering? If everything is digital and everything is blockchained up and everything is ledger systemed up and everything is backed up with cybersecurity and it's immediate and it's based on 3 or 4 or 5 different models and methods of verification, which are all, industry standards across a global ISO standard scale. What is preferable? The ability for people who might be escaping, family violence or trying to, if they're refugees, trying to gain access to money that may be in bank accounts that are in different countries. How do we start breaking down international borders when we look at some of these ways in which we're looking at payment systems? So they're my 3 Ps for you, which is the possible, the probable, and the preferable. And then the other 3 Ps are this idea of the permanent present payments. Now, the problem for a lot of people that try to apply futuristic, predictable, and modeling type behaviors around things is that we are stuck in the permanent present. We always think about what we have now, what our confines are now. So if you as an individual, when you're facing a problem or an opportunity in the way that you work, I'd suggest if you could just meditate on if you were a science fiction writer and you were to take your problem and put yourself into a science fiction world, what would that world look like? Outside of any constraints of normal being, like outside of any constraints of modern physics, how is it you would want your system to actually work? It's quite refreshing sometimes. Crazy ideas come left field, but it's actually quite a fun way of reinvigorating discussion around how you're wanting to be going forwards. What's your 5-year plan around this particular piece of software or this particular interaction type with your clients? And of course, here, I've already mentioned the words artificial intelligence, and this is a sort of a poke in the ribs, really, at our understandings of what we're actually going to be relying upon when we look at something that is artificial intelligence, machine learning, which are two different concepts. And the thing here is that we've never called this stuff artificial stupidity, but in fact it is. Artificial intelligence is great at playing things like Go and chess that have really rigorous and set rules. But when you're dealing with multimodal, multi-platform, human-based information, you do not have a simple set of rules within which to work. Now, we have no singularity yet, though some people are working towards it. And the singularity is this idea that we will have a computing system that has the same power as a human brain. I think they've cracked a mouse brain and they've version of it. They've cracked a monkey brain version of it, but they certainly haven't got to us primates yet in terms of the computing power. Now, the thing there is that data in is data out, right? What you put into a model, what you put into a system is the thing that comes out the other side. And there are a couple of things that are happening in parallel alongside this push for open data, data oceans, open source software, and all of the wonderful, lovely things that we would like to see happen around education and openness around how decisions are being made that can affect people's lives. But there's actually also a legal curtain chasing all of that, which is called explainable AI. So if you've never heard of explainable AI, I'd suggest it's something that's probably the one main point of homework for you after today's presentation. Explainable AI is literally that. It is artificial intelligence algorithms that are open to people to read. Now, the closest one we had here in Australia, and you may have had this in other countries around your COVID-safe tracking apps. And so we had all of our code released for our COVID-safe tracking app. And the coder community jumped on it very quickly. And one of the first things they found was that they actually hadn't listed Tasmania as a state. Poor Tasmania, which of course it should be mentioned as a state. But look, the idea is that we shouldn't rely completely on these systems, that there's a human factor always involved. And so, especially when it comes to making decisions that will actually influence people's lives, like the ability to get credit to move into a house, to get a better car, to maybe get some new clothes so they can interview well for a better paid job, to pay to go to university, to pay to go to school, to pay to travel internationally, to pay to see family and friends after the pandemic lockdowns. All of these things have a human emotional quotient to them. And so should we really be purely relying on computer says yes, computer says no? And that's why this explainable AI is coming. And so some of the other things that are coming, and I'm sure you've talked about these a lot in recent times, are things like Bitcoin, so non-regulated financial transactions and all of the interesting things that can bring with it. I'm working with a number of young artists and charity folk looking at this idea of NFTs for good, NFTs that are carbon neutral, NFTs that are zero impact, NFTs that have environmental messages. We have charities and artists now selling NFTs as a way to make money and fundraise. They've become a real way to take historical documents from the digital archives, such as the world's first ever tweet. I can't remember how much that sold for as an NFT. And it's a really interesting concept because we always say this about things like art, is that the real value of a piece of art is whatever it is that somebody's worth paying for. Like what they're going to pay for it. Banksy has lived on this for over 10 years now. Something I found quite interesting recently was this concept called good coin. And good coin was all about free coins that you can get every day. And then there's a big marketplace and people can actually just click and sell and move market coin for this free good coin. So it's basically like universal basic income. So if we think about, there are, grandmothers in the Philippines that are playing gaming platforms in order to earn coins that they can then use to pay for their grandchildren's education. We've now got this idea of professional gaming for coins, like professional game playing for coins. And so you have to ask yourself, why? What is the MO underneath all of this? Is that we're actually, someone that creates something like a free coin service what are they actually getting from that? And it's the thing I say to everybody who ever downloads a free app on their phone, which I would just recommend that you try and read the terms and conditions, though I know they are incredibly painful, because there's no such thing as a free app. There's no such thing as free coin. There's always going to be something that you are giving of yourself, your time, your energy, some kind of information that the software company behind that is using. And so this idea of good coin for me was a really great way for me to have a quick look to see what it would be in terms of my profile to start just gathering some of this coin. And I'm trying to get to a point where I can actually go into the marketplace and see what I can get with some of these coins. And just every day, just tapping on it, getting my coin. It doesn't really cost me anything to do that. I've forgotten to do it recently. I'll probably just recheck my website and do it again in the next few days. But when we look at this in terms of social implications, the idea that if everybody's at least connected to the internet, everybody can do something to earn coin of some kind. And I say that with a British accent, so it actually has meaning, like to earn coin. That's an expression from the Northeast, or an expression from the Midlands. When I was growing up, you earn good coin, right? And so I find this all incredibly interesting, a little bit worrying, and the lack of regulation around some of these things really bothers me. I feel like, especially when it comes to things like interacting with people under 18, especially under 12s, like kids that could literally get addicted to games to earn money because of a socioeconomic system they're in, and therefore they're not going to school or something hideous like that, or what kind of data is actually being collected by how these coins and NFT people are working. It's all really interesting, all completely. Even though it seems to be disruptive technology, it's also still ripe for disruption, how you deal with some of these things. And we see this now all the time, that new things are just popping up inside this idea of, NFT suddenly became NFT for goods, suddenly became carbon neutral NFTs. Because of course, the carbon footprint behind a lot of these digital currencies and technologies is absolutely huge. And that leads me on quite nicely to this idea of globalised Forex. I'm going to tell you a little story of me as a British kid growing up. I remember having to, at school, learn all the European countries. And one of the things with all the European countries, you would learn, obviously, the name of the country, the capital city, the population estimate, the currency. And so when the euro came in, I looked at the pots of currency that my parents had been collecting over, 30 years or whatever from their travels. And I have Italian lira in there, doesn't exist anymore. I've got French francs in there, don't exist anymore. I've got Deutschmarks in there, don't exist anymore. And so was the EU almost like a bit of a model to look at an equal currency globally. And should the British have joined? It's very interesting. Should the British have joined? Looking at what's happened with Brexit now. But, you can't predict the future based on behaviours of the past. But this idea of a globalised Forex, I find really interesting. But because partially of the geopolitics around currency valuation. But then, also when you have a globalised Forex, what does that mean for economic growth of individual economies and individual people? Should people trade in Forex more than stocks and shares, for example? I think it's just really interesting that we don't really learn about this at school. And yet it's something that's incredibly important to everything that we do and all the companies that we work with. And so another area that I think is completely ripe for disruption is Forex. I think that we probably don't do enough with Forex as individual consumers. Apart from, when you go on holiday, you always buy a bit of currency and you pay a little bit of a fee, and you hope the currency, rate isn't too bad. And I know now whenever I buy like Moonpig cards and stuff in the UK for families and friends for birthdays, I buy it from my Australian accounts and I always see that little fee, a little international fee there. And so if you think about it, if Bitcoin and deregulated global financial systems are going to become regulated or become normal, what does Forex even mean anymore? If I can buy my Teslas with Dogecoin, can I basically buy my mum's present from Marks and Spencer's with it as well? What's that going to be like? It's very interesting. But the thing that's close to my heart is the fifth industrial revolution. So we talk about Industry 5.0, Society 5.0, and all of these things are about basically taking everything we've learned from the fourth industrial revolution, 4.0, all of the Internet of Things, all the sensors, everything that we do, and actually creating it around a fulcrum that is purely based on purpose, purely based on the betterment of human society and the protection of the environment. And that might sound a little bit woo and out there, except we know that there is money in environmental sustainable backed businesses. We know that there's profit going to be coming out of things like green hydrogen. I'm not giving you financial advice, by the way, but we know that these industries are going to be worth something because we cannot keep in the permanent present in terms of our transport systems, in terms of the fossil fuels that we're burning, in terms of the nuclear power that people are creating. We can't keep doing it. We've got another billion people coming on this planet in the next 20 years, another billion mouths to feed, another billion people living in various levels of socioeconomic status facing the climate emergency. And so when we look at things like ESG investment, which suddenly become a really sexy term, for me, ESG investment is the only investments I've ever done. I've only ever invested in early tech and early stocks that are looking at things that are either good for the environment, good for people, good for the planet, and that are completely watertight away from corruption. And so it's really fun. I studied environmental protection at university, 20 years ago. So suddenly the things I studied 20 years ago are now sexy and people are talking about them on social media. But this idea of money 5.0, I think is really great. No one's really had conversations about this. So if you'd like to connect with me about your thoughts and ideas around Money 5.0, I'd love to talk to you about it. It's something we're looking at in the university here in terms of the School of Cybernetics and various things of what is that future engineering? What is that next industrial revolution? What are the things that are gaping holes of opportunity and open goals? What are the areas that are actually not going to translate very well, such as, we've seen some shake-up on the stock market since COP26 around the world in terms of some of the areas that we always thought were going to make money for the next 30 or 40 years actually are not going to make money for the next 30, 40 years. And so is ESG investment just another wish, or is it actually something that's going to make money? I think it's going to be something that will make money. But of course, we cannot be having a conversation, and I have to do my random hacker image here. We cannot have a conversation about digital currencies, globalized forex, digital systems, the fifth industrial revolution, everything that technology brings, if we don't talk about cyber. Now, sovereign cyber capabilities around the world are an area that are currently in every single country I could possibly think of, probably lacking not only diversity, but also the number of people that are needed. And so we know, for example, that you can actually retrain, for example, veterans. They've got that Australian charity that works, Australian business that now works in the US as well, called With Me. They started here in Australia, and the idea there was they would take veterans, do an aptitude test, and look to see who was good at cybersecurity jobs, who had that natural aptitude. And so this idea of aptitude and skills versus qualifications is going to be the way which we plug this gap in terms of sovereign cyber skills. And I'd suggest that's in every country, not just Australia. I'd certainly suggest that's in the UK, that's in the US, that's across Asia Pacific. And especially when we look at our geopolitics around cyber, the fact that we actually will need to have a lot of people with cyber skills working across every platform and every level of our businesses. And in fact, how a few years ago, sustainability was the big sexy buzzword, and then digital transformation was the big sexy buzzword. Now I think actually sovereign cyber skills is going to be a very big and important word. And you will probably start seeing this coming out in job adverts and job descriptions, to the point where you even need to have cyber skills working as a board director. You need to understand the risks of process. You need to see things as a systems engineer. And we need to understand how our systems can be vulnerable, because if we don't understand how our systems are vulnerable, then imagine if somebody else does. You're only as strong as your weakest link. And there's just a very quick point here to make around technology and regulation. So, of course, this is the Boston Dynamics Spot the Dog. And it's recently been bought. Boston Dynamics was bought by Hyundai, which is a car company. They bought it off SoftBank. I think they paid like $1.1 billion for Boston Dynamics. And so you've got to ask yourself, okay, let's look at this from the financial world. Why would a car company buy a robotics company? What's the possible? What's the probable? And what's the preferable? Ignoring the permanent present. How can we work out what is the strategy and what that then means? Going forward, many people will say things like, my children might be the last generation to ever get a driver's license. As soon as they hit their 30s, nobody will learn how to drive a car anymore, because the transport that we use will be so automated that you won't need one, except people will still get driver's license to drive those classic Aston Martins from the 2030s, that makes me feel so old, but that's exactly how it's going to be. And we've always had technology ahead of the regulation. And the thing is about fintech, though, that fintech has actually been a really great starting point for a lot of things like medtech, especially around public health, in terms of blockchain, provenance, food. Ag tech has a lot to learn from fintech. So what does a car company have to learn from a robotics company? And what does a robotics company have to gain from being part of a car company? Well, I could wax lyrical about how that is an absolutely perfect pairing of two seemingly disparate entities into something that is actually future-proofing and a bit prescient around how Hyundai as an automotive or vehicle or transport or Industry 5.0, Society 5.0 business is going to be. The one thing I know about Spot the Dog, though, it's designed by roboticists, and so applying it in places where it has to go up and downstairs, they have to go backwards downstairs, apparently. Maybe it's because of the way their knees are. I've never seen an emu going backwards downstairs, but it's the same knee kind as an emu, right? So if you put that in a place where people are walking up the stairs, can the dog still see when it's going down the stairs? And the big lesson here is you separate. You separate automated and human-based technologies. So should you separate cars from being automated cars and human-driven cars? Absolutely. Should you separate helicopters from drones? Yes. Should you separate, high-altitude pseudo-satellite systems from commercial aircraft? Absolutely. There's a thing that we call SimOps or ConOps, so simultaneous operations, and that you always separate the automated from the human-based. Do we do that in the financial world? Do we do that when we look at processing payments? Do we do that in terms of that pipeline of how people are working inside the money world, where the money is flowing? I don't know that we do. And I think this is where, as Shakespeare would say, the rub lies. Because when you mix humans with technology that's designed to be automated, all you find are problems, all you find are issues, all you find are ways in which that is not the perfect solution. And so to end this conversation today, I've thrown quite a bit at you here, but I want to talk to you about the Internet of Bodies just very quickly. So we went from Industry 4.0, Internet of Things, sensor technologies. Now we're going into Industry 5.0 and the Internet of Bodies. And so the human sensors that we're going to be wearing, the ways in which, for example, like I said earlier, there are supermarkets that already exist that you walk in, you put everything you want in your basket, you put it in a bag as you leave, and you walk out. You don't interact with a single human being, because it's recognized your face and the artificial intelligence has watched every single thing that you've taken off the shelves. What a great way to stop shoplifting, which is apparently still a massive issue around the world. People literally just walk out of supermarkets with trolleys full of stuff. I wouldn't even dream of doing something like that, but apparently they do. And so how do we look at then, credit ratings and credit risks and fraud prevention on things like credit card purchases? We go back to biometrics. So at the moment, if I'm activating an Apple Pay on my phone, I have it reading my face. It's got Face ID. So I'm already using biometrics as part of my payment processes when I'm buying those Moonpig cards for my sister or my aunt or whomever in the UK for their birthday cards. I'm already hitting up against a number of these different technologies. And so the Internet of Bodies is really interesting for me. We've got some very out there people that like to push the edge with things. There's a person that likes to put payment chips and transport chips under his skin to sort of swipe on and off the ferries and the buses and trains in Sydney without paying directly. He just uses his chip in his hand. And he kept getting it deactivated. The Transport for New South Wales, did not want somebody putting microchips under their skin. What if we don't need microchips under the skin? What if you're actually reading our face? So it's a bit Minority Report, that movie with Tom Cruise, if you haven't seen it, but I met the futurist who wrote that script, and he's a very clever man. So this idea of money and us. So, the future of robotics is not the robot sitting in the corner. The future of money is not the money sitting in a bank account. We're going to have a more visceral and more human interaction with how we get paid, how we pay, how we spend, what we do with our money, how we plan our money, what we think about our money, how we earn our money, where our money is regulated, where it's sat, where we have coin, where we have cash, where we have Forex, where we have dollars, where we have pounds. All of these things will connect back with us in a much more human way than we've ever thought of before. And I'll leave you with that note. But I would love to connect with you. So this idea of this fintech as a cybernetic system is the humans, the technology, and the environment in this world of new cybernetics, and how that's actually going to be a lever and a pivot and a place of growth, diversity, and opportunity for people working in the world of payments and of finance and of a human-based money turning over system. So thank you so much for your time. And please reach out and connect with me. Cheers for now.